My dad claimed everything in court, until I whispered 2 words that made the judge turn pale. Stay with me, because what happened that day still feels unreal, and I need to tell you how it all started. The courtroom was cold, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest. I sat there at 22, my palms sweating, my heart pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. Across the room sat my father, Thomas Moran, calm, confident, and perfectly dressed in his expensive navy suit. To everyone else, he looked like a grieving widower, just trying to protect what was left of his family. But I knew better. I knew that behind that charming smile was the man who destroyed everything good in our lives. He had left us when I was 10. He walked out one night and never came back. No calls, no support, no love. My mom, Mara, spent years working herself sick just to keep us afloat. When she died last year, he showed up at her funeral like he'd never left. People whispered about how strong he was, how he'd always taken care of his family. I wanted to scream. Now, he was sitting in that courtroom claiming every piece of my mother's life. Her house, her savings, even her jewelry. He told the judge he only wanted to manage it for me, until I was ready. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't protecting me, he was stealing from me. Again, his lawyer spoke with practiced charm, talking about how much Thomas loved his late wife, how he was just trying to make sure her memory was preserved. Every word made my stomach turn. My lawyer, Charlotte, tried to argue, but I could tell the judge was leaning toward him. My father had that effect on people. He made them believe whatever story he told. I kept my head down, gripping the edge of the table, fighting tears. I thought of my mom's hands, the way they used to shake when she was tired, the soft way she'd tuck my hair behind my ear. She had trusted him once, and it cost her everything. I couldn't let him take what was left of her. When the judge cleared his throat and started to announce his decision, something inside me snapped. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Everyone turned to look at me. My father's confident smile didn't falter, not yet. I walked slowly toward the bench, my voice steady though my body trembled. I leaned forward, close enough that only the judge could hear me. 2 words. That's all I said. The judge's eyes widened. His face turned pale. The room went silent. And that's when everything changed. Everyone in Ashburn used to say my dad, Thomas Moran, was the kind of man every family wished they had. He had that confident smile, the firm handshake, the kind of voice that made people listen. At parties, neighbors would crowd around him, laughing at his stories and admiring how lucky my mom was to have such a successful, loving husband. But those people never saw what happened when the front door closed. At home, the perfect man disappeared. My father's smile would fade, replaced by that cold, sharp look that made even silence feel dangerous. My mom, Mara, tried so hard to keep peace. She'd tell me to stay in my room when his voice got louder. Sometimes she'd come to my room later, her makeup smudged and her hands trembling. "Everything's fine," she'd whisper, forcing a smile, but I could see the truth in her eyes, the pain she tried to hide. I remember one night more clearly than the rest. I was 10, sitting on the stairs, clutching my blanket while their voices echoed through the hall. He shouted about money, about respect, about how she owed him for everything. Then the sound of something breaking. My mother's soft cry. And then silence. The next morning, he left. He told her he had to travel for work and kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. That was the last time I saw him for more than a decade. No birthday calls. No letters. Nothing. My mom picked up 2 jobs and somehow managed to keep us going. She never talked about him again. She just smiled tighter, laughed less, and tried to give me a life that didn't revolve around pain. Over the years, we learned how to breathe again. We built a small, quiet life, just the 2 of us. I went to college nearby so I could help her with the bills. She would still hum while cooking, and some nights she'd sit by the window, staring into the dark like she was waiting for something that never came. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything fell apart. Mom collapsed at work. By the time I reached the hospital, she was gone. Heart failure, they said. But I knew it wasn't just her heart, it was years of surviving him. At her funeral, people came to comfort me, bringing flowers and soft words. And then I saw him. Thomas. My father. Dressed in a perfect black suit, pretending to wipe tears from his eyes. She was my world, he told people, shaking hands, acting like the grieving husband. I stood there frozen, feeling sick. When he finally came up to me, he smiled, that same fake smile, and said, "I've always taken care of this family, Leah. Don't you forget that." That was the moment I realized. He wasn't there to mourn my mother. He was there to take what little she left behind. A few weeks after the funeral, I was cleaning out the attic when I found an old wooden box tucked behind some dusty photo albums. It was small, locked, and wrapped in a faded blue scarf that used to belong to my mother. My hands shook as I held it. Mom never kept secrets from me, or so I thought. I searched through her drawers until I found a tiny key tied to a piece of thread. It fit perfectly. When I opened the box, the smell of old paper and lavender filled the air. Inside were a few letters, some photographs, and one neatly folded document, her will. I sat on the attic floor, reading every word with tears in my eyes. She had written it in her own handwriting, dated just 2 months before she died. Everything she owned, the house, her savings, her jewelry, was left to me. There were no conditions, no fine print. Just a mother making sure her daughter would be okay. For the first time since her death, I felt a bit of peace. That peace didn't last long. 2 days later, I got a call from a lawyer representing my father. He said Thomas was contesting the will. He claimed the document was forged, that I had written it myself to steal his late wife's assets. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, my heart pounding. "That's impossible," I whispered. "It's her handwriting." The lawyer's tone was cold. "We'll let the court decide." I couldn't believe it. The same man who abandoned us for years now wanted to take everything my mom left behind, even the roof over my head. That's when I met Charlotte Danes, my lawyer. She was calm, sharp, and had the kind of quiet strength that made you believe things could still be okay. After reading the will, she frowned and said, "Leah, your father has connections. The judge assigned to this case went golfing with him last month." My stomach dropped. "So you're saying this isn't going to be fair?" She sighed. "We'll fight it, but you need to be ready. He'll pull every trick he can. People like your father don't care about truth, they care about winning." Her words hit hard, but I knew she was right. Thomas had always been that way. He built his life on charm and lies. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor with the will in my lap, tracing my mother's signature over and over. I knew she left this for a reason. She must have known he would come back. There had to be something else, some secret she never told me. Something that could expose who my father really was. And even though I didn't know what it was yet, I promised myself I'd find it. I wasn't going to let him win again. I couldn't stop thinking about what my lawyer said, that my father had connections, that the judge might already be on his side. I needed something more than my mother's will, something that could prove who he really was. So one quiet afternoon, I went through Mom's old desk. It still smelled like her, faint perfume and paper. The drawers were filled with memories. Old bills, letters, recipes, photos of me with missing teeth. I almost gave up when I noticed one drawer that didn't open fully. I tugged harder, and a small envelope slipped out from behind the back panel. It was sealed and yellowed with age. On the front, in her soft handwriting, were the letters LM, my initials. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller document wrapped in tissue. I started with the letter. "Leah," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I'm no longer there to explain. There are things about your father I never told you. I wanted to protect you, but I realize now the truth will protect you more than silence ever could." I could barely breathe as I read on. She wrote that years ago, before he met her, Thomas was already married to a woman named Evelyn Rusk. They never divorced. He simply left one day, moved to a new state, and started over under his middle name. That meant his marriage to my mother wasn't legal. It was all a lie. I read the line 3 times before it sank in. Everything he built with my mother, the house, the business accounts, even my birth certificate, was based on a lie. My mother had been his second wife only in name. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid. But if he ever tries to hurt you or take what's yours, look for the truth. It's out there, Leah. He can't hide it forever." I sat there, shaking, the paper warm in my hands. My father was a fraud. But I needed proof, something the court couldn't ignore. The smaller document inside the envelope was a faded copy of a marriage license. The names were clear, Thomas E. Moran and Evelyn Rusk. The date was 15 years before he met my mom. It wasn't enough on its own. I needed someone who could confirm it, someone who knew him back then. So I started digging. I spent hours searching online, calling old numbers from his business days, tracking down anyone who might remember him. Most of them hung up or said they didn't know anything. But one man, an old co-worker from his first company, paused when I said Thomas's name. You mean the guy who vanished after that big scandal? He asked. That one question told me everything. I was finally getting close to the truth. It took weeks of searching, but I finally found her, Evelyn Rusk. The name on my mother's letter led me to an old nursing home in Delaware. The place was quiet, surrounded by oak trees and the faint smell of medicine. When I told the nurse I was there to see Evelyn, she gave me a curious look, but led me down a long hallway to a small room filled with soft light and books stacked on every surface. Evelyn was sitting by the window, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Her hair was silver, her eyes tired but sharp. When I introduced myself and said my father's name, something changed in her expression. She went completely still. Thomas Moran, she repeated, almost whispering. I haven't heard that name in a very long time. I sat down beside her and told her who I was, Mara's daughter, Leah. Her eyes softened when I said my mother's name. Mara was beautiful, she said quietly. He didn't deserve either of you. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then she began to speak, her voice trembling slightly but steady enough to cut through the air. Thomas and I got married in 1988, she said. He was charming back then too. Always making promises, always talking about the future. She looked out the window, her fingers tracing the edge of her blanket. But when I got sick, everything changed. I was diagnosed with lupus, and he couldn't handle it. One day he said he needed to go on a business trip, and he never came back. I tried to contact him for years, but eventually I gave up. I felt my chest tighten. You never divorced? She shook her head. No, I was too weak to fight it. I thought he'd file eventually, but he didn't. I didn't even know he'd remarried until someone showed me a photo years later. He was calling himself Thomas Ellard by then. My hands trembled as she spoke. It all made sense, the letter, the fake name, the lies. My father had married my mother while still legally married to Evelyn. Evelyn reached into a drawer beside her bed and pulled out a small folder. Inside was a faded marriage certificate with her name and his printed clearly across the top. I kept it, she said. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't forget. Maybe it's time it helped someone. I took it from her gently. This was the proof I needed, the missing piece. My father wasn't just cruel, he was a criminal. His entire marriage to my mother had been illegal. When I showed the certificate to Charlotte later that evening, she looked at me with wide eyes. Leah, this changes everything, she said. Then her tone dropped lower. But you need to be careful. If Thomas finds out you have this, he won't just fight back in court. He'll try to silence you. I knew she was right, and that scared me more than anything. It was late evening when I heard the knock on my door. 3 sharp, heavy knocks that made my stomach twist. I wasn't expecting anyone, and something about the sound told me who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Thomas. He stood there in his tailored coat, holding a smug smile that didn't reach his eyes. For a second, I thought about pretending I wasn't home, but I knew that wouldn't stop him. I opened the door just enough to block his way. Leah, he said smoothly, like we were old friends catching up. You've been hard to reach. I've been busy, I replied flatly. He smiled wider, stepping forward until I had to move back. Without waiting for permission, he walked inside, glancing around my small apartment like it offended him. So this is how you've been living? Your mother would have wanted better for you. I can help you with that. My chest tightened. What do you want, Dad? He took off his gloves slowly, setting them on my table like he owned the place. Let's be practical, he said. This court case, it's messy, it's public, and it's going to destroy whatever image your mother tried to leave behind. I'm willing to make you an offer. He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and slid it toward me. There's $20,000 inside. You take it, sign over your claim to the house and the rest of the estate, and we both walk away happy. I stared at the envelope, but didn't touch it. You think you can buy me off? He tilted his head. I think I can save you a lot of pain. That was when I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. The calm mask he always wore started to crack. His voice dropped lower, sharper. You have no idea what kind of woman your mother really was, he hissed. She wasn't the saint you think she was. You don't know what she did to me. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay still. You left her, I said quietly. He leaned closer, his breath hot with anger. You don't know anything, Leah. You were just a kid. She lied to you about everything. Keep pushing me, and I'll make sure everyone sees who she really was. My hands were trembling, but what he didn't know was that my phone, sitting on the table beside me, was already recording. Every word, every threat, every piece of venom coming out of his mouth was being captured. When he finally noticed I wasn't responding, he straightened up and smoothed his coat. "Think about it," he said coldly. "You don't want this to get ugly." He left as suddenly as he'd come, the door slamming behind him. I stood there for a long moment, shaking. Then I picked up my phone and replayed the recording. His voice filled the room, cruel, arrogant, and clear. For the first time, I had something real against him. The courtroom was packed that morning, the air thick with whispers and the faint sound of shuffling papers. I sat beside Charlotte, my lawyer, gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles hurt. Across the room sat my father, calm and polished as ever. He gave me a small, fake smile, like we were just here to clear up a misunderstanding between family. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. The case had drawn attention in town. People wanted to see the family dispute play out. Most of them probably believed my father's version of things. His lawyer started with a speech that sounded rehearsed but smooth. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is not about greed. It's about protecting a grieving young woman from outside influence and emotional confusion. My client, Mr. Moran, has only ever acted out of love for his daughter." I clenched my jaw as he continued, painting me as the unstable, ungrateful daughter who was being manipulated by a lawyer hungry for attention. According to them, I was too emotional to think clearly and too young to understand the real world. Charlotte leaned over and whispered, "Let him talk. His words will help us later." My father played his part perfectly. When he was called to speak, he lowered his voice to that soft, controlled tone he used when lying. "I only want to make sure my daughter's inheritance is protected. She's been through so much," he said, pretending to glance at me with concern. "Grief can cloud judgment. I just want what's best for her." Some people in the courtroom nodded, clearly falling for his act. Even the judge seemed to soften. I could almost see the sympathy forming in his eyes. When it was my turn to take the stand, I felt my throat tighten. I kept my gaze steady, remembering what Charlotte told me. Stay calm, stay truthful. I answered her questions carefully, explaining how my father had reappeared after my mother's death and immediately tried to take control of everything she'd left me. Then Charlotte said, "Leah, can you describe your last interaction with your father before this case?" I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. "Actually," I said quietly, "it's easier if I show you." She nodded, and the court clerk connected the device to the speaker system. The moment my father's voice echoed through the courtroom, the entire room went silent. "You don't know what your mother was really like," his voice snarled through the speakers. "Keep pushing me, and I'll make sure everyone sees who she really was." Gasps rippled through the room. My father's face went pale, his composure slipping for the first time. When the recording ended, no one spoke for several seconds. I looked at the judge, hoping to see a reaction, but his face stayed unreadable. Thomas's influence ran deep, too deep. I could tell this was far from over. The second day of the trial felt heavier than the first. The tension in the courtroom was sharp enough to cut through. Reporters whispered from the back rows, and people leaned forward in their seats, as if waiting for a twist in a movie. I sat beside Charlotte, my palms slick with sweat, staring straight ahead. My father sat across from me, his posture perfect, his confidence restored. He thought he'd regained control after yesterday's recording. He had no idea what was coming. When the judge entered, Charlotte stood. "Your Honor," she began, her tone steady, "we have new evidence to present, documents that directly challenge Mr. Moran's legal claim to this estate." My father's lawyer immediately objected, but the judge allowed it. I reached into the folder on the table and handed Charlotte the first document. She approached the bench and placed it before the judge. "This is a certified copy of a marriage certificate dated 1988 between Thomas E. Moran and Evelyn Rusk." The sound of the words filled the room like a thunderclap. My father's head turned slowly toward me, his face losing all color. The judge adjusted his glasses and read carefully, his brow furrowing. "Are you saying Mr. Moran was legally married to another woman before his marriage to the late Mara Moran?" Charlotte nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And there's more." She handed over a second document, a signed statement from Evelyn Rusk herself, confirming she and Thomas were never divorced and that he left her while she was ill. The judge read in silence for a long time. My father's lawyer scrambled to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. These so-called documents are obviously falsified. My client's reputation is being attacked with baseless claims and—" "Sit down, Mr. Lowell," the judge interrupted, his tone firm. Charlotte glanced at me, and I knew it was time for the final piece. I stood, my voice shaking but clear. Your Honor, my mother left a letter before she died. It explains everything she knew about my father's lies. I walked to the bench and handed him the letter. The one written in my mother's soft handwriting, the ink faded but still clear. It had been verified by an expert days before. The judge opened it slowly, reading every line. The courtroom was silent except for the faint rustle of paper. When he reached the end, he looked up at my father, his expression unreadable. This letter matches the handwriting of the deceased? Yes, Your Honor, Charlotte said. Verified by forensic analysis. My father shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. He looked cornered for the first time. The judge leaned back, exhaled, and then said, We will take a recess. This new evidence requires careful review. As the gavel struck, the room erupted in whispers. Charlotte placed a hand on my shoulder. You did it, she whispered. But as I looked across the room at my father's cold, furious eyes, I knew. This wasn't the end. It was the moment the tide began to turn. The final hearing felt like the longest day of my life. The courtroom was packed again, but this time the air was different, heavier, tense, filled with curiosity. Everyone knew this was the day everything would end. I sat quietly beside Charlotte, my fingers twisting together in my lap. Across the room, my father looked calm and collected, as if he still believed he could talk his way out of everything. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. My father's lawyer rose first, speaking in that same smooth voice that had fooled so many people before. Your Honor, he began, the defense maintains that all documents presented by the plaintiff are fraudulent. We have reason to believe that the late Mrs. Moran created these forgeries out of anger and resentment, seeking to damage my client's reputation. My stomach turned. I could barely believe he had the nerve to stand there and say that about my mother. But my father nodded along with every word, pretending to look heartbroken, pretending to be the victim. When it was his turn to speak, he stood and looked straight at the judge. Your Honor, I love my wife. Whatever mistakes I made in the past, I've paid for them. But this, he gestured toward me, this is not justice. It's revenge. Mara was a complicated woman. She wanted to hurt me even after death. His words made my hands shake. I felt Charlotte glance at me, silently asking if I was ready. I nodded. When the judge finally turned to me, I stood. My voice was soft but steady. Your Honor, may I approach the bench? He nodded, and I walked forward, feeling every eye in the room on me. My father watched with narrowed eyes, still confident, still believing he controlled the story. I leaned forward slightly, close enough so only the judge could hear me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. Then I whispered the two words that ended everything. Evelyn's alive. For a second, the world went completely still. The judge froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Then he looked sharply at my father. Alive? He repeated aloud, his voice echoing through the room. My father's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Charlotte stepped forward. Your Honor, we have arranged for a live video statement from Evelyn Rusk, the woman legally married to Mr. Moran since 1988. The screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life, and there she was, Evelyn, sitting in her nursing home, calm and composed. She looked directly into the camera and said, Thomas Moran is still my husband. We were never divorced. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's lawyer stumbled over his words, trying to object, but it was useless. The judge's face turned pale as he realized what this meant. Every claim my father made, every lie he'd built his case on, had just crumbled. For the first time, Thomas Moran had nothing left to say. The days after the final hearing felt unreal. News spread quickly. The once respected Thomas Moran, the charming businessman everyone admired, was now facing criminal charges for fraud, bigamy, and perjury. Reporters stood outside the courthouse, trying to get a glimpse of him as officers escorted him away in handcuffs. I watched from a distance, not with joy, but with a strange calm. Justice had finally caught up with him, and I didn't need to say another word. Evelyn's testimony had done more than just win the case. It exposed decades of deceit, fake identities, forged documents, hidden accounts. Everything he built was a lie. The same man who'd tried to take my mother's home ended up losing everything, including the one thing he valued most, control. The court officially granted me full ownership of my mother's estate. The house, the savings, and the jewelry all belonged to me now, just as Mom intended. But instead of feeling powerful, I felt humbled. Those things weren't just property. They were pieces of my mother's love, her sacrifices, and her strength. The first thing I did was visit the local women's shelter, where my mom used to volunteer every Saturday. I remembered how she'd come home tired but smiling, saying, "If I can make one woman feel safe tonight, it's worth everything." So, I donated a portion of the inheritance to rebuild their library and fund new beds. It felt right, like she was guiding me even now. Weeks later, I visited Evelyn again. The nursing home was quiet, filled with the soft hum of television sets and the smell of disinfectant. When she saw me walk in with a bouquet of white lilies, her eyes brightened. "You didn't have to come all this way, sweetheart," she said softly. "I wanted to," I replied, placing the flowers in a vase beside her bed. "I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for you." Evelyn smiled weakly. "Your mother would have been proud, you know. Not because you won, but because you didn't whisper those words out of hate. You whispered them out of truth." Her words stayed with me long after I left. As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun hit my face, warm and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of fear or anger pressing down on me. I felt free. I looked up at the sky and thought of Mom, her laughter, her quiet strength, the way she used to hum while cooking dinner. I realized I hadn't lost her completely. She lived on in the choices I made, in the courage she'd taught me to hold on to. And as I walked away from the nursing home, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise. My dad claimed everything in court until I whispered two words that made the judge turn pale. What about you? Do you think Leah made the right choice by exposing her father's lies, or should she have just let the past stay buried? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories filled with truth, courage, and a little bit of justice, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.